Olive Police Department back in 1987. Through a long, illustrious career, in August 2016, Stephen Beecher was promoted to Chief of Police. Until his promotion to Chief in 2012, he had been the police department's selection and recruitment coordinator since 1994. He is presently an advisory board member to the Mount Olive Child Education and Learning Center, committee member of the Mount Morris County Juvenile Detention and Alternatives Initiative, and the co-chair of the Police Diversion Subcommittee of Juvenile Detention Alternatives. It's a great pleasure, and with great respect, I introduce our Chief of Police, Stephen Beecher.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome to all of you who took the time tonight to join us on Zoom. I hope you and yours have been relatively unaffected by the pandemic, and for those of you who have experienced a loss, my condolences. To date, we have lost 5 officers in New Jersey to the virus. We hope to see the numbers nationwide decrease and get on the other side of this. With the growing pandemic and civil unrest, it has been a challenging time for law enforcement. But we are grateful that statewide First Amendment activity has been peaceful. Police reform is a hot topic, so I am grateful for this opportunity to provide the community with some background on what is done in Mount Olive and what some of the state's expectations are for police departments. Questions have been raised about how officers are hired, what their training is, how officer performance is tracked, and if necessary, how they are disciplined. To begin, it is important to know that nationally and regionally, police hiring, training, methods of accountability, and transparency are not uniform. I believe New Jersey is a progressive state ahead of the curve compared to others. To begin with, in Mount Olive, we believe the most important thing is to hire good people. This is the foundation for everything else. Previous to being chief, as Andy had said, I was the selection and recruitment coordinator. Over the course of the last 10 years, typically we would have about 500 recruits apply for each opening. In 2019, we had one of our lowest number of applicants apply, around 150. This reflected a national trend where police departments nationwide saw a 60% drop in applicants. For applicants, the testing process consists of 4 phases in Mount Olive before they would receive a conditional job offer. The first phase is a written test. This test is administered by the New Jersey State Association of Chiefs of Police. After recruits take the test, we take the top 50% and send them on to the physical assessment. The physical assessment includes a 1.5-mile run, a 300-meter run, vertical leap, sit-ups, push-ups, and bench press. The Cooper standards are utilized for scoring, and the results are typically tabulated within a day. The recruits are notified of the results by email. Once again, the top 50% go on to the interview phase. When the recruits report for this phase, they start with a pre-objective interview. This is conducted by 2 officers trained in this interview method. This interview is to determine if the recruits have anything that would preclude them from being an officer. For instance, if they committed a crime or DP offense, disorderly persons offense, within the last 4 years. Most recruits do not have an eliminators and move on to the panel interview. The panel interview is generally conducted by a lieutenant, sergeant, and 3 officers. After the interviews, all the interviewers rank and score the candidates and make a recommendation to me of whom I should interview. I will interview 3 individuals for each opening. When I select the individual for the job, I make a conditional job offer, and once the person accepts, this enables me to send them for a medical and psychological exam to determine fitness for duty. I also have the lieutenant in charge of the detective bureau assign a detective to do a background investigation. The purpose of the latter, to determine if there is anything in their background that would preclude them from being a police officer. If they are not eliminated by the psych, medical, or background, they go to the police academy. All officers in the state of New Jersey must complete the New Jersey Basic Police Academy course and receive certification from the Police Training Commission. The Police Academy is a 22-week training program consisting of comprehensive classroom and hands-on training in professional development, criminal justice system, police community relations, law, legal requirements of arrest, search, and seizure, evidence, and the use of force, communication, vehicle operations, emergency medical care, weaponry and unarmed defense, patrol concepts, traffic, criminal investigations, physical fitness, and practical exercises. Before the recruits graduate the academy, they must meet the academic standard, pass a PT test, meet all critical standards, and qualify with a firearm. Following the police academy, officers must complete 3 months of field training. During this time, they are assigned to a senior officer and taught how to do the job. This entails successfully meeting over 500 field training objectives. After successful completion of field training, they begin their lone patrol duties. They're on probation for a year. At year's end, they must attend their probationary review. At the review, they can be terminated, have their probationary period extended, or made full-time permanent. The field training program for us is critical to imprinting the culture, values, and expectations of our organization on the new officer. It is impressed upon all officers that the Mount Olive Police Department endeavors to develop and maintain positive relationships with all members of our community while providing police services that reflect recognized best practices. To validate what best practices are, we have sought accreditation through the New Jersey State Association of Chiefs of Police. After an exhaustive audit by them in 2013, we received our initial certification, accreditation. We have been accredited since then in 2016 and 2019, and in 2021, we'll be preparing for our 2021 recertification. Our organization values training, accountability, and transparency. We know these significantly impact on the delivery of services and the public trust. So in training, New Jersey has training standards established by statute and by Attorney General directive or prosecutor directive. The Community Law Enforcement Affirmative Relations Training Program, otherwise referred to as CLEAR, was instituted in 2016, and officers must take at least 3 credit hours of continuing education each year. Since the CLEAR program's inception, officers have completed classes in de-escalation techniques for individuals with special needs and mental health issues, cultural diversity and de-escalation, sex assault investigations. 2020 is an elective year, and officers will be completing a course titled Law Enforcement Interactions with Transgender Individuals. Other mandated training by the state are twice a year, firearms qualifications and use of force, pursuit, computer databases and networks accessibility training, and emergency dispatch with 911. Once a year, we must train our officers in domestic violence, bloodborne pathogens, hazardous materials, right to know, and legal updates. Every 3 years, we're required to provide training on workplace harassment, discriminatory profile training, Alcatest, radar, handling the mentally ill, and ethics. In addition to the mandatory training, Mount Olive sends officers to advanced training in leadership, horizontal gaze nystagmus, and DWI detection, arson, sexual assault investigation, death investigation, Megan's Law, crash investigation, and many others. Mount Olive believes that continuous learning is not just necessary, but an ethical responsibility to our community. Officer accountability and transparency. Allegations of police misconduct are always taken seriously and investigated by an internal affairs officer. And depending on the nature of the allegation, they are investigated by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office Professional Standards Unit. So whenever we receive a complaint, an internal affairs complaint that may be criminal in nature, we have to send that first to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office reviews that and makes a determination if the complaint is criminal or administrative in nature. If it's criminal, the prosecutor's office investigates that. If it's administrative in nature, that's investigated by the Internal Affairs Bureau of Mount Olive PD. Each police department is required to post on its website information regarding the complaint process and how to file a citizen's complaint. If you go to our website on the public information section, you will see information on that as well as other things, including the early warning system. We have to report to the prosecutor's office on a quarterly basis all internal affairs cases that we receive and the outcome. What we also do is we do meaningful reviews. Meaningful reviews are reviews that are conducted by our staff officers and division commanders on incidents that are potential bias incidents, our use of force, involve pursuit, a traffic crash, an employee injury, or any other incident that I deem necessary to be investigated by a division commander. MVR reports, acronym for motor vehicle recordings, reports and other documents are studied so the staff can be informed and make a decision of the outcome. During the interview, the staff must determine if the incident reveals a change in policy or procedure is necessary, if there's a need for additional training for the officer, if there's a need for modified or additional equipment, or if disciplinary action is warranted. In 2018, the Attorney General mandated all police departments establish an early warning system to determine if there was a pattern, practice, or trend or performance deficiency, inappropriate behavior, or misconduct on part of the officer. In Mount Olive, we use the Guardian tracking software to track and review officer performance and behavior consistent with the AG directive. In addition to negative performance, Mount Olive tracks positive performance. Tracking both has proven beneficial to the annual performance review each officer receives annually. Mount Olive tracks two categories for the early warning system. The first category is used internally and consists of administrative issues. We track that to see if there's a potential problem with the officer and to try and head that off. The second category is used to detect employee deficiencies. Any confirmed flag is reviewed and reported to the Morris County Prosecutor's Office. So that for the first category, which is mostly administrative and minor, we 3 incidents in a 6-month period will trip a flag. And by trip a flag, I mean that all the staff will get an email and notification that a particular officer has been involved in certain conduct over the previous 6 months that warrants a review. With the second category, it's 3 incidents over a 12-month period, a longer period of time, and the same thing will happen. If those 3 incidents happen in the Guardian tracking system, it will notify the staff and division commanders of a need for review. So some of those incidents that will initiate a flag are an internal affairs complaint against the officer, whether initiated by another officer or by the public, civil actions filed against the officer, criminal investigations or criminal complaints against the officer, any use of force by the officer that is formally determined or adjudicated to have been excessive, unjustified, or unreasonable, domestic violence investigations in which the officer is an alleged subject, an arrest of an officer, including a driving under the influence charge, sexual harassment claims against the officer, vehicular collisions involving the officer that are formally determined to have been the fault of the officer, a positive drug test by the officer, cases or arrests that are rejected or dismissed by a court, cases in which evidence obtained by an officer has been suppressed by a court, insubordination by an officer, neglect of duty by an officer, unexcused absences by an officer, and any other indicators as determined by me. These, as I said, these incidents throw a flag over a 12-month period. That flag would initiate a staff review of the officer's behavior. In addition to the initiated staff reviews, internal affairs and division commanders routinely conduct random checks to audit and identify areas of risk or opportunities for improved performance. An early warning system review can have 2 outcomes. It can be a false positive, or it can indicate remedial corrective action is necessary. For instance, A false positive would be an officer that is involved over a 12-month period in 3 vehicular accidents, and they were all car deer accidents. That would be a false positive. One that would require corrective or remedial action would be that we would have 3 substantiated incidents over a 12-month period of an officer having, for instance, demeanor complaints. Now, when we talk about remedial intervention, the options include training, retraining, counseling, intensive supervision. And this lasts for a minimum of 6 months. And after that 6 months, we have to continue to document that officer's performance for another 6 months. It could be as fitness for duty examination. All those 5 possibilities apply. What we have to do is whenever we have an incident that is confirmed for remedial or counseling, training, intervention, we have to advise the prosecutors of that, the prosecutor's office of that. So there's a records maintenance system program, which we advise them through that. So it's not, those incidents aren't just reviewed by Mount Olive, they're reviewed by the prosecutor's office. So since 2013, we have had the meaningful reviews because that was necessary for us to be accredited. And then in 2018, the Attorney General came out with the early warning system. So in addition to the internal affairs process, we've had those 2 processes in place since 2013. In addition to those that are required, we now have random drug testing that's required of the officers. So twice a year, I have to test 10% of my police department for drug use. And those have to be random and unannounced. They're randomly selected by a computer program. It doesn't matter if the officer is working or not. If they're on vacation, obviously we wait till they're back from vacation. But if you're off duty, we call you in to submit your urine sample. And basically, if you're not prescribed medicine and it comes up hot, is what we refer to it, for a medicine that you're not prescribed, you're immediately suspended and the prosecutor's office is notified. I think that the random drug testing in large part came about because of there had been a lot of articles about officers taking steroids illegally, and there's been a big problem, as we all know, with opiates. And that is something that, it touched our profession as well as many others. So I think based on those 2 things, the Attorney General came out with that directive. And I just want you guys to know that that's something that we have to do twice a year. This year, despite the COVID pandemic, the Attorney General still mandates that we do 2 random tests, which is pretty telling because our qualification standard with firearms has been relaxed, but not that. In addition to random drug testing, I have to appoint somebody as a Brady-Giglio liaison. So Brady and Giglio are 2 separate court cases. And basically, those 2 court cases are about the credibility of officers testifying. So we have to submit a monthly report to the prosecutor's office for an officer that has any of the following. If there's a sustained finding that he filed a false report or submitted a false certification on any criminal, administrative, employment, financial, insurance matter in their professional or personal life, we have to notify him. If there's a pending court complaint or convictions for an officer for any criminal disorderly persons, petty disorderly persons, municipal ordinance, or driving while intoxicated matter, we have to inform the prosecutor's office. If there's any sustained finding that undermines or contradicts an officer's educational achievement or qualification as an expert witness. So I'm sure some of you have heard about people in the school system, and Doc, you may have heard of this. I know we had this in Mount Olive not too long ago, where somebody had applied to the school and said they played professional baseball. They never played professional baseball. They had a certain degree they never got. If we have an officer that falsely represents himself in that regard, we have to report him to the prosecutor's office. We also have to do so if there's any sustained finding of fact by a judicial authority that the employing agency, which includes the officer, did not intentionally tell the truth about any matter. We have to advise them if we find an officer to be biased against a particular gender or ethnic group. We have to advise them that if an officer was untruthful or demonstrated a lack of candor. And we have to advise them if there's anything in our files which in good faith would potentially affect the officer's credibility. So Brady Giglio and those directives coming down from the Attorney General's office is another thing that addresses accountability and with our officers. Furthermore, what many of you may not know is that prior to a couple of years ago, if an officer came, if we wanted to hire an officer from another police department, I could have my detective go out to the police department he's presently employed at and review his personnel folder with that officer's approval. But the internal affairs file was off limits. That was considered confidential. Since Governor Murphy came in and Attorney General Gruhl has been in office, they've changed that so that I am obligated to provide the internal affairs file on any of my officers should they want to go to another police department. So let's say I had an officer that wanted to go to Paramus, and Paramus previously would come here and they would review the personnel file. Now I have to give them the internal affairs file as well. And we have an affirmative need on my part. If I were to want to hire somebody from another town, I have to check that internal affairs file as part of my due diligence. So I know there was recently there was something about an officer in New Jersey going from to 9 departments. I don't know how that happens, quite honestly, but apparently it did. In that case, they would have had to have checked the internal affairs file for each police department, which apparently did not happen. So that's some of the things that are being done to address accountability and transparency with police departments in New Jersey. These are not things that are done in every state. I think that New Jersey is really progressive and ahead of the curve in that we are responsive. So when issues are pointed out, I think they're being addressed. And I know right now, some of the things that they're talking about is re-examining the use of force policy for the state of New Jersey. They also have a use of force portal that's out there. If anybody wants to go on and sign on and look at it, it's www.nj.gov/OAG, as in Office of Attorney General, /force. So I would suggest that you go on there and check that out before August 1st. So they're looking to re-examine what we're doing in terms of use of force in New Jersey, and they're also looking at a licensing program for police officers in New Jersey. So most of the country, I believe, has a licensing program. In New Jersey, officers have to go through an academy that's certified through the Police Training Commission. And when you graduate the police academy, you get what's called a PTC, or Police Training Commission number. But it's not considered a licensing number at this point. So you get a PTC number, and what that does is that basically confirms that you graduated from an academy sanctioned by the state of New Jersey. But what happens after that point is that you have to attend the minimum standard of training required by the Attorney General, but that's certified by your police department. There's nothing particular to the officer where they have to complete stuff regarding their training. And I think that's what they're looking to change. So those are some of the things that are going on with us, Andrew.
Thank you, Chief, for that extensive set of opening comments. And I think you touched on a lot of the topics that we have here. But if it's okay now, we'll go into the questions here. And our general goal is to wrap up by about 8:15, leaving time for the Chief to give some final comments at the end. So, Chief, why don't we talk a little bit about the existing force, especially the demographics of the police force. Tell us a little bit about the demographics of the force align with the demographics of Mount Olive. What percent of the police force lives here in Mount Olive? Do any of the officers speak Spanish or other languages? I know some of this is on the website, but if you could give a summary, that would be great.
Sure. So Mount Olive, we just had 2 kids graduate the academy. I call them kids. Of course, they're men, but being my age, they're kids. We have 50 full-time officers. 2 of our officers identify as Hispanic, and they both speak Spanish. We have another officer that identifies as white. He speaks Greek. 96% of our officers in Mount Olive are white. We have 4 officers that are female, and that represents about 8%. So according to the 2010 consensus or census for Mount Olive, 80% of Mount Olive was white, 11.5% Hispanic, and 8.2% Asian, and 5.7% African American. So those were the top 4 that were identified. I know that there was a change from the 2000 census where whites represented about close to 87%, and African Americans represented a little over 2%. So that's been a change, an increase, and it's going to be interesting to see how the 2020 census comes out, because I believe that our community has gotten more diverse since I got here in 1987. Regarding officers that live in Mount Olive, we have 5 officers, or 10% that live in Mount Olive. It's something that really is an individual's choice as to whether they want to work where they live. Of those officers that live in Mount Olive, about 3 of those grew up in the town and stayed here, and a couple others moved in. But the bulk of our force lives outside of town.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, let's go into the broad topic of training. This is kind of a multi-part question here. So prior to the recent murder of George Floyd at the hands of police using excessive force, what was the status of Mount Olive Police Department's cultural competency and diversity training to reduce and resolve unconscious bias and improve relationships within a diverse community? B, crisis intervention training to reduce the risk of serious injury or death during an emergency interaction between persons with mental illness and police officers. 3, what areas in this regard what areas within this area of concern were discussed by the mayor and yourself, the police chief, and were there any changes agreed to be implemented? And if so, why, and when would these changes be implemented?
Okay, regarding the cultural competency training, when Governor Murphy came in and Attorney General Gruhl, they established what's called the Community Law Enforcement Affirmative Relations Training Program. Goes by the acronym of CLEAR. And so they have been really progressive in trying to educate officers regarding all people in our community. So that was instituted in 2016. And officers must take at least 3 credit hours of that course a year. And that's something that is done over the internet. They record training, and then we're required to watch that. Since the CLEAR program's inception, Officers have completed cases in classes in de-escalation techniques for individuals with special needs and mental health issues. So that included people that were on the autism spectrum as well. Cultural diversity and de-escalation, sex assault investigations, and then this year the topic is law enforcement interactions with transgender individuals. So there has been an effort on the part of the Murphy administration to have police officers trained in these areas. In addition, even though it has not been something that has been mandated, we have officers, myself included, that have taken courses on unconscious bias, and those have been at conferences that we've attended. It's not been something that's been mandated for the entire force, but those are classes that some of our officers have attended. Regarding crisis intervention, we send officers to a crisis intervention course at the Morris County Police Academy, and we have also sent officers to advanced hostage negotiations training. And in the past, there used to be a course called verbal judo, and that the officer that used to teach that has since stopped, but probably for close to 20 years, that was taught up until about, I want to say 8 years ago. So those are some of the things that we've received training on in those regards. As far as areas of concern that have been discussed with the mayor, as you all probably know, the mayor has a robust social media presence and often receives communication from individuals identifying problems and issues they would like to have addressed. Those complaints run the gamut, from neighbor issues, noise and traffic complaints, to requests to not allow any protest activity. Regarding police reform, these changes will be directed by the Attorney General, and our State Association of Chiefs of Police is hoping to be invited to the table when that is discussed. The mayor and I have discussed the possibility that in the present environment, body-worn cameras will be required. So we've discussed that as a possibility for the 2021 budget. As far as changes we agreed to be implemented to and why, that's something, like I said, it's going to be kind of steered by the Attorney General and prosecutor directive. So we're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. We anticipate something is going to be happening in the near future with that. And once again, we hope that we're invited to the table when that's spoken about.
Thank you. Tell us about police combat training. Are the police trained in combat training? How many hours do they have? You talked a little bit about de-escalation situations. From your standpoint, is that sufficient in this area?
I think it's something that could improve, but there is so much training that is mandated that logistically it's difficult to get all that in. But I do think at minimum that's something that could be addressed in the police academy. So for instance, years ago, they didn't have terrorism awareness, counterterrorism awareness classes as part of the police academy. But at post-September 11th, that has now become part of the basic training in the police academy. So I think that when we're talking about police reform, de-escalation would be something to speak about for the new recruits. Regarding being combat trained, we're mandated by the state of New Jersey to qualify twice a year with our handgun and our shotgun. If we have a long rifle, which Mount Olive does, we have an M4 rifle. We have to qualify twice a year with that and receive training with that twice a year. So essentially, we have to qualify with that 4 times a year. Typically, when it concerns the training block, we do 12-hour days with each officer. So for a total of 24 hours. This year, we backed that down to 16 because of the COVID virus. And we, like I said, we also conduct the qualifications twice a year. And the qualifications are they generally average about 4 hours per officer. And once again, that's with the shotgun, the handgun, and the rifle. In addition, we do a 4-hour training session with every officer for active shooter training. And we do that in one of the schools when they're vacant, because that's, of course, been an issue over the course of the years.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about, please, going back to the recruiting, your position on mandatory college degrees. Is that something we require for future police cadet candidates on our force?
Yeah, so what happens is the minimum requirements for a police officer are set by state statute. College is not one of those minimum standards. So it's essentially left up to each jurisdiction as to how they want to handle that. Now, in Mount Olive, our requirement for college is 60 credits or an associate's degree. There are some schools or agencies that require a bachelor's degree, but that's what ours is. Our experience is that if you raise it up to a bachelor's level, it reduces the pool of potential candidates for the job. So that's why we've stayed at where we're at with that. I know that the NAP Commission, going back to the New York City investigation, spoke about how education was important for police officers, and we agree with that. We encourage our officers to work towards a bachelor's degree. As a matter of fact, for promotion in Mount Olive, you have to have so many credits working towards a bachelor's degree to even be eligible to get promoted. So that's the way we handle it in Mount Olive. But to get on, you just need 60 credits or an associate's degree.
Very well, thank you. You mentioned about autism in the training. Going back to that specifically, do our officers have training in autism spectrum disorder?
They have received that. Back in 2016, the Knights of Columbus generously provided us training through a group. And then once again, through that CLEAR training, we've also had training on the autism spectrum awareness.
Thank you. So let's change gears a little bit in the area of general topic of crime. It's been well noted in a couple different surveys about Mount Olive being positively ranked as one of the safest towns, both in New Jersey and nationwide of our size. Categories include both violent crime and property crime that you need to be very well rated to be on these lists. Tell us a little bit about what has contributed from your standpoint, us being positively ranked against other towns.
Yeah, you know, I wish I could tell you that I had the magic formula. I could just tell you that for us, once again, we can't do our job with the support of the community. I mean, we know that. I mean, we have a force of 50 guys, and we have 30,000 residents, not counting people that work here. And so for us to maintain order and keep crime low, 50 people aren't going to do that, because those 50 people, they're not on duty all the time, right? So our minimum staffing for a patrol squad, or what would otherwise be known as the uniforms, for us, that's 7 people. And that doesn't count people on vacation, people out sick. Our minimum staffing is 5 people. So on any given day, you'll have 5 uniformed patrol officers at least out there in Mount Olive. Now, we have additional support personnel in here, but essentially, those are the guys that are responding to the calls, those 5 people. So we really find it important to build bridges with the community. I mean, if we're to prevent crime, we need the support of people. And we try to get out there and we try to get to know people, because let's face it, it's always a lot easier to call somebody when you know them, you have a relationship with them. A lot of people feel like they're putting the people, the police, they're calling them about stuff that is inconsequential. And if you know somebody, you can just call them up and ask them. But if you don't, you feel odd doing it. I always tell people, listen, call us. If we have something better to do, we'll be doing it. But we feel that's really, really important. The community policing aspect. We also feel it's important, with limited resources, to direct your resources to where they're needed. So we do a lot of intelligence-led policing, and we look at our statistics, and we follow what's going on in town, and we put our officers where they need to be based on what we're seeing. And we actually have what's called a directed patrol list, where officers are directed to patrol in certain areas of town based on call volume and problems that are brought to our attention. And then lastly, I think the big thing is being responsive. So all the support units, the Detective Bureau, our Support Services Division, Communications and Records, when people send us stuff that they want to see action taken on, we ensure that action is taken on that. We really make an effort to be as responsive as we can. So I would say those are the key aspects to our culture in trying to do that.
So going a little bit deeper, tell us a little bit about what crimes are the most prevalent in town. Can you tell us anything about the statistics demographically, about the crime, the arrests, the traffic stops, and are there certain parts of the community that appear to have a higher level of 9/11 calls versus other parts?
Sure. So when it comes to incidents in town, by and large, by a large degree, the largest number of calls we will take are traffic crashes. Over the last 5 years, we've had 5,000 up till today, we've had 5,309 traffic crashes. So that's well more than one a day. Second to that, our biggest number are narcotic and drug arrests at 949. A large part of the officers' job here in Mount Olive is keeping the peace or quelling disturbances. We've responded to 864 incidents over the past 5 years. Theft is a big issue. We've had 607 theft arrests, 591 DWI arrests. That's a big issue for us as well. Fraud, 549. Domestic violence at 511. And mental health crises at 453. Those are our big issues in town.
Can you go back to, are there certain demographics or certain pockets in the community that that you look at the data on?
So in terms of arrests, I don't have any statistics, demographics on arrests, but as part of our accreditation, we're required to keep statistics on motor vehicle stops. And that's been going on since 2013. So so far this year, we have made 1,885 motor vehicle stops. Of that, 17% of the persons cited or given a ticket, 17% were white, 16%, and these are males. 17% white male, 16% black male, and 17% unknown. As far as females, 20% white, 21% black, and 33% unknown. Total warnings issued. We issued 1,538 of those. 82% were warnings were issued to white males, and 84% to black males. And as far as females, warnings, 80% for white female, 79% black female. In 2019, we had 8,619 motor vehicle stops, and we issued 1,618 tickets. 5,609 stops involved males, and 3,010 involved females. Of the citations or summonses that were issued, 20% were issued to white males, 15% to black males, and 23% unknown. Citations issued to females, 19%, 15% for white, 19% for black female, and 18% for unknown. So those are some of the basic statistics on the motor vehicle stops.
Do you have any commentary to add to that relative to the population that you described in our census in Mount Olive?
So going back to the census of Mount Olive, let me see. 5.7% of the the population, according to the 2010 census, 5.7% of our population is African American, 80% is white, 11.5% Hispanic, and 8.2% Asian.
Right. So I'm just looking at that, just listening to those numbers here and comparing that to the statistics you had on the traffic stops. Any commentary regarding the relationship of those two sets of percentages?
It doesn't, listen, 5.7%, if that's what the African American population represents in Mount Olive in 2020, obviously, if we're issuing 16% black male and 21% black female in 2020, obviously that's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to explain that. I don't believe it's anything that's purposeful. But yeah, I mean, it's something that obviously, looking at strictly at numbers, it jumps out.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Let's go to drugs. Questions about drugs, and what can you tell us about drug use in Mount Olive? What can you tell us about drug use and arrests in Mount Olive, including type of drugs? And what information can you share, or what do we track regarding drug-related overdoses and deaths?
So the bulk of our drug-related arrests are for marijuana, and that's followed by heroin and opiates. Since 2015, we've had, like I said, 945 narcotic arrests. We do track overdoses and overdose deaths and Narcan deployments. Since 2015, we've had 42 Narcan deployments, 49 drug overdoses, and 16 overdose deaths. Well, officers have saved 91 lives over the course of the past 5 years due to overdoses. All Narcan deployments and overdose deaths are reported to the Morris County Prosecutor's Office. Of special interest to law enforcement is the stamp that is on the packaging of heroin. And the reason, of course, that that's important is that some dealers mix heroin with fentanyl, and some mix a little heroin with fentanyl, some mix more fentanyl than heroin, and some mix all fentanyl. And so that's important in tracking the deaths that we're seeing as a result of the addiction problem.
What can you tell us from a trend in the drugs? What is different today than just a couple of years ago? Are there certain, overall, is the drug problem increasing, decreasing, or the mix of drug-related incidents that we have in town?
Well, I mean, there's certainly been an increase in heroin use, and I think that's been driven by the problem with opioids. So heroin is in the same family. And so what'll happen is, if you get addicted to opiates, if you're buying diverted prescription drugs on the street, you're typically paying $1 a milligram. But for a bag of heroin, you can get the best heroin in the United States right here in New Jersey. Unfortunately, that's not something we should be proud of, but you can get the best heroin here because it's pretty close to where it comes in. So it doesn't get cut as much. So you can get a bag of heroin here for as little as $3. So if you're looking to get an opioid that's, let's say, 20 milligrams, just one pill is going to cost you $20. Or you want to get a bag of heroin that's $3. So you do the math there. Eventually, a lot of addicts will turn to heroin to substitute that addiction. And so that's what we've seen drive up the heroin problem. It's been pretty awful. I mean, when you think about the fact over the last 5 years, in addition to the 16 deaths that we've already had, that we could have 91 other people dead, that's, for Mount Olive, it's a pretty scary number.
Okay, thank you. We have another category I'll put into, how are mental health and addiction issues of arrested or stopped drivers handled? So in terms of, in addition to officers responded, what other resources from a social services standpoint may be available?
So for mental health, what we do in our catchment area, St. Clair's is our resource. So if we have somebody that's in need of mental health services, we would reach out to St. Clair's and basically try to get permission to bring them in for an evaluation. Now, we can either transport them, or if they're not cooperative, we can have a screener come out to Mount Olive and screen that person, and then give us the authorization to forcibly remove them to the hospital. So that's one of the options for us. And of course, in order for that to occur, somebody with mental health issues has to be deemed a threat to themselves or others. So as you can imagine, there are a number of people that fall through the cracks there, right? Like they're obviously suffering from some mental health issue. We contact the screener, they come out, but there's not enough to get them the help that they obviously need. So that's oftentimes a challenge to us. By and large, we're able to convince people to go to help. And it's actually surprised me how many people just call us and ask us to get them to the hospital to get treatment. So for instance, over the last 5 years, we've taken 453 calls for psychiatric or mental health problems. And the vast number of those people have gone voluntarily to get assistance. But still, obviously, it's a problem that our officers see often and need to take action on. Regarding addiction, we've been pretty, I would say, ahead of the curve on that. In 2016, when I became chief, we established a liaison with CARES. CARES is an acronym for the Center for Addiction, Recovery, Education, and Success. That is out of Rockaway Borough. And basically what they do is they train certified peer recovery specialists. So in the past, if I were to respond to your house and try and convince your son or daughter that you really need to get help, these people can help you, they can make a difference in their life, people would look at me like, what the hell do I know, right? I'm this guy that I've never been addicted. I don't know what the challenges are. I have no street cred. But if we're able to contact a peer recovery specialist to come out and that person comes out and says, hey, listen, I've been there, I've done that, I live that, and I'm on the other side, I think that's a very powerful tool. So we've had a relationship with CARES since 2016. Since 2016, it's become a requirement for us to, when we arrest people or we deal with people that have overdosed, we leave them all the contact information for CARES. So they have the information to reach out for the peer recovery specialists. In addition, we have a very good relationship with the Morris County Sheriff's Office and their Hope One van. Their Hope One van is staffed by a mental health counselor, a certified peer recovery specialist, and a sheriff's officer, and they will pay visits to various locations in Mount Olive. We'll put that on our webpage, and people can go there that need assistance in getting recovery, or they can go there because they have a family member or relative that's suffering with addiction, or they can go there because they want to get trained in how to use Narcan. So that's the other thing they do. They will teach you how to deploy Narcan in the event that you need it. On top of that, Mount Olive is one of 14 towns in the county and one of 400 nationwide in 32 states that is part of the Police Assisted Addiction Recovery Initiative. And essentially what that is, it's a program to give people that are addicted a safe place to come in and get help. So somebody could come in here off the street and say, listen, I'm addicted. I really need help. And what we'll do is there's an agreement with Daytop, New Jersey, and we would contact Daytop, New Jersey, and they would send out a certified peer recovery specialist to help get that person into treatment. So in Mount Olive, there's two options for people. You can have a certified peer recovery specialist from CARES or from Daytop try and get you into treatment. I think that's a pretty good option for a lot of these people to have.
Okay. Okay, I know we're coming to past a little bit top of the hour here. A couple more questions, Chief. Are you familiar with the NAACP guidance on community policing?
I am not.
Okay, that was a question. Let me dive into the next one, a little bit long. A plan by New Jersey's Attorney General to identify state troopers and other police officers accused of serious misconduct has been put on hold amid legal challenges from the state's most powerful police unions. The directive met stiff opposition from the unions, including the State Policemen's Benevolent Association, the State Troopers Fraternal Association, and others who argued the Attorney General's directive would identify not only police officers fired over excessive force or racist behavior, but also officers disciplined for routine infractions. Do you have a position on this? If so, please share it, and how best to handle those police officers who are accused of misconduct in Mount Olive.
Yeah, my position on that is that it's too broad, and I'm not in favor of that as it presently exists. Now, I'm a member of this State Chiefs of Police Association. I have seen Attorney General Gruhl speak many times, and he's always said that we, the state chiefs, would have a seat at the table when it came to decisions that were made regarding policy and such. And I have found him to be very responsive and to have included us at the table when it comes to policy being made. When it came to this policy, it was sprung on us. And I do think it's too broad, and I do think it has to be revisited. And I do support the unions getting a stay on this till it is revisited. I think that it puts the chief of police in a position where we have to put out the names of officers that really their violations are not serious. The other thing is that when you talk about, one of the requirements is that what qualifies as serious discipline is a 5-day suspension or worse. So different chiefs, when it comes to discipline, chiefs have a lot of discretion. You're gonna have chiefs that are more lax, you're gonna have chiefs in the middle, and you're gonna have chiefs on the other side. So there's not a uniformity in that. And so it's something that needs to be revisited. I think it was something that was last minute. I was really disappointed in the AG that he didn't include us in that, because he has included us in everything else. And I was just really disappointed in how that was handled.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned a little bit about video cameras before, that you anticipate or that you expect that to be in the 2021 budget. Is that something that we can expect to see, or is that part of the planning on the Mount Olive Police Department?
Well, so I try to get things in line for what's going to happen in the next year's budget. I have to typically submit a budget in September, so we're in July, and it's time for me to start thinking about those things that we're going to need. Last year I was asked about body-worn cameras, and I wasn't really keen on the idea. And I'll explain why. Generally speaking, all civilian encounters are subject to audio and video recording. So if we have those body-worn cameras, and that's with the exception of schools, healthcare facilities, and houses of worship. The caveat being that it's not investigative or emergent in nature. As part of the the guidelines, we're required to appoint a body-worn camera liaison, and we're required to maintain all recordings. The cost of instituting a body-worn camera system is substantial. Each camera unit is approximately $700, and every officer, I believe, should have their own. In addition, all body-worn cameras must be functional. We should have replacements for those that are damaged or broken down. So for us, 50 officers, I'd figure about 60 body-worn cameras. And if that were initiated, that would be a cost of about $42,000, not including the supporting infrastructure, like charging stations. Further, the maintenance agreements generally last 4 to 5 years. Maintenance agreement being that as part of the cost of buying those body-worn cameras, they agree to come out and fix them. After 4 to 5 years, the technology becomes outdated, so you're really compelled or forced to buy new body-worn cameras because the cost of fixing the old ones is really substantial. They make it so that you have to get those new cameras. So that would be a recurring cost to the township. So you could count on, in addition to your infrastructure, at least every 4 to 5 years, buying all new body-worn cameras for the officers. Body-worn cameras would also result in officers being off the road for additional amounts of time. Each body-worn camera recording would have to be fully viewed, along with the in-car camera video to write reports and such. And they would also have to tag those when they did those body-worn cameras. They would have to go into the system and tag, that's what they call it, tag those areas where it shouldn't be available to the public. So that would take even more time. The other concern for me was OPRA. So the Open Public Records Act and discovery. So for every arrest or every arrest we have with an individual, not only we have the mobile vehicle recordings now we have to submit. Somebody has to go through that, record that, burn a DVD for each officer involved. The same would have to be done for body-worn cameras. So I would have to have somebody go through each case, each officer, and burn a DVD with all those recordings for all those involved. That would take a lot of time, and that would necessitate putting at least another individual into our communications and records division. And lastly, it's the privacy interests of the public. So when officers respond to a civilian's residence or for a person believed to be a victim, the officer must notify the person that the body-worn camera has been activated. We can deactivate the body-worn camera, conditions permitting, but only upon the request of the civilian. But we can't advise a civilian, hey, listen, this is something you might want to ask me to turn off. We can't do that by directive right now. So as it stood last year, I didn't recommend to the mayor and council that we do that. But I know that, for instance, Councilman Roman has asked me directly about it. And though it's not something that I necessarily would do without a mandate, I think the mandate may be coming soon. So I think it's something that we have to be prepared for.
Thank you. Okay. You see we have 3 or 4 more questions. Do you have time for these, sir?
Sure.
Okay. Homelessness. Tell us a little bit about, do we have homeless in Mount Olive? And if so, how is Mount Olive working with the homeless people?
We do have homeless in Mount Olive. The Market Street Mission is a good resource for us temporarily for a lot of the homeless, but it's really the Morris County Department of Human Services that we would reach out for. Sometimes we do have people, we do have people that are in temporary housing in the hotels in town. We do have people that are living in the woods in sections of town that we're not aware of, that incidents happen where it becomes known to us. So for instance, I want to say about 2 months ago, we had an individual that died in a tent behind the village green, and that person was homeless. but it's not something that's in your face. It's not something that, like a lot of urban areas where they're out and about during the day. And to my knowledge, we don't have any camps, homeless camps in town. Most of our guys run across homeless people in their vehicles. And so people will often park in shopping malls or something overnight, and our officers will check them out, and there'll be homeless people moving from one point to the next. So it is an issue for us that we deal with. It's really unfortunate, but thankfully it's not something that's commonplace.
Okay. Topic is militarized equipment. Does Mount Olive have what might be considered militarized equipment? And if so, is it purchased at a local or county level?
So the military surplus program is also referred to as the 1033 program. And we have gotten equipment from the military surplus program. We had a 2.5-ton truck that we got, which we used as a high water rescue vehicle for a while. That was then turned over to the fire department. We have our Hummer, which has been repainted with the American flag on it. Some of you may have seen that at our National Night Out events or about town. And then we've gotten our long rifles from the military surplus program. So the long rifles are essentially M16s, and when we get them, we change out the barrels to put on a shorter barrel, make them an M4. And so we have gotten those. That's the extent of the property that we've gotten from the surplus program.
Okay. Tell us about COVID, and thank you for your opening comments regarding officers that we've lost. Do the officers have a role in enforcing either the mask or other social distancing requirements as per executive orders?
Yeah, so the executive orders, I mean, my guys probably hate me by now because every time an executive order or directive comes out, we put it out on our document managing system for them to read. And as you know, there's been quite a bit that have come out. We are expected to address those issues with people, but we are not allowed to charge anybody without the authority of the prosecutor's office. So if we were to charge somebody for an executive order violation, and we've done that a few times here in Mount Olive, that has to be approved by the prosecutor's office. So it's not something where we're going to go out, if somebody doesn't have a mask on, we're going to go out and arrest them or cite them for that. It's more likely that we'll ask them to comply with it, take a report, and reach out to the prosecutor's office and see if charges are necessary or appropriate. I think that the intent on contacting the prosecutor's offices was to try to get some uniform enforcement across the state. And so if you had those decisions being made by the prosecutor's offices, those are a significantly less number of agencies than all the individual police departments. And I think that the powers that be thought that it might be kind of not be equally applied as much if it were left to the devices of so many police departments.
Very well. And is your department, sir, are there COVID testing requirements for your department?
There are. Back on April 1st, we had an officer that tested positive for COVID. So he was quarantined because he had contact with a number of our other officers. We had to take them out of the rotation. And so the officers that were quarantined for 14 days. And if they showed no symptoms, they were allowed to come back to work after being seen by a doctor. They didn't have to be necessarily tested. Of course, the officer that tested positive, we knew he was positive. He also had to be cleared by a doctor. What I'm doing presently is that if an officer visits one of those states that are identified that you shouldn't be going to, they have to be tested before they come back here.
Interesting. Thank you. I have a question I do want to get to that was submitted late. Can you ask if there's any gang activity in town or surrounding towns? Is gang activity something that's present in our township?
The gang, I would say that it's not gang activity, but we have a gang presence. So we have a number of gang members, from outlaw motorcycle gangs to the Crips, to the Bloods, to the Latin Kings, that live in town, but there's no gang activity in town. So they live here. We know who they're affiliated with, but they're not participating in any gang activity in town. So I would just call it a gang presence.
Okay. And lastly, going back to the traffic stops, do you have a sense of what % of the traffic stops are local residents versus people passing through?
Yeah, we don't track that. We're required to keep the gender and race stats per accreditation, and that's what we do, but we don't track where they're coming from. Now, you could get that information because you could go into the system and do it, but it would have to be a hand search, which would be very, very time consuming.
Very well. And you saw in the last, we had somebody submit an issue of trespassing at their property. Did you see that in our question set?
At 5 Pondview?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we've had some incidents of trespassing down there. I know we've made an arrest in the recent past for somebody going in there. It's been a home that's been abandoned for quite some time. And there's been a number of people, I would suspect juveniles, that go in there at off hours. So it's something that we check, but without posting somebody there full time and without an alarm system and so forth, it's something that the potential for that happening is pretty great if someone is determined enough.
Okay, thank you. So everybody, it's now 8:20. I'm going to, just thank everybody. First of all, this would not have been possible without everybody's thoughtful submission of questions. We covered an awful lot of very important topics. I thank everybody who took the time to submit, to be part of this important discussion. I'd like to offer Chief closing comments. Tell us a little bit about, what would you like, what support does the police department need from the community? What requests are you making of the community? What are your priorities for the rest of 2020? And are you getting what you need, the support you need from our town council and elected officials? How would you like to wrap it up?
Andy, that's quite a lot. So, listen, we're very fortunate in Mount Olive that we have this, in my opinion, and this is my perspective, I think we have the support of the community. I'm sure it's not 100%, but just during COVID and during everything that's been happening, the amount of meals that have been purchased for the guys, the letters that have been sent to the guys, the notes, it's really been positive, and I'm very, very grateful for it because it has been a tough period for the men and women here in Mount Olive. As far as the council and the mayor, we've had a lot of support from them over the years. I would tell you that we have one of the most robust training programs in the county, and that doesn't happen without funding, and that funding doesn't happen without the approval of the governing body and the mayor. So we're grateful for that. What we're looking to do over the coming year and future is continue to build relationships with the community. If people have opinions as to police reform, I'd be interested to hear those. I think it's important to listen to what people think should happen. And I also think and I'm really grateful for this, I also think it's really important to have discussions on that because like I said earlier, police work it's layered and complicated throughout the United States. So issues may be happening in Georgia or Minneapolis or Texas or Florida, and the concerns in those locations may not apply here, but there still obviously are issues that we need to work on. I don't see police reform as a specific destination. I think it's more of a continuous improvement issue. I mean, certainly we've had it as a profession. Historically, we've had issues in dealing with minorities and such, and it's something that we need to continue to improve upon. So if people have ideas,